Hey there, welcome to this week's edition of the CG Exegesis.
Hi.
We're with you this week. It's a joy to be with you. I'm Abel, she's Jacinta, and well done for making it to this week's CG. We are going to be talking about hope in hardship. It's a sermon that you have heard over the past Sunday, and we're just going to talk about it in a moment.
We are. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to do this as a Swedish Bible study method, and then we've got some questions for you. But Swedish Bible study.
Why is it called Swedish Bible study?
I don't know. Do you know?
I read about this recently. Apparently, it's called Swedish Bible study because it was a Swedish Bible study. It was apparently started by a YWAM worker in Sweden. And I think she just found this method to be very helpful, and then it really caught on.
Maybe we should make a Malaysian Bible study.
Yeah, Malaysian Bible study method. Someone come up with the simple formula.
And then let us know.
Well, what is the Swedish Bible study? Something that you notice,
Yes.
something that you are curious about,
Yes.
and then something that we can apply.
Yes, so observation, what you're curious about,
Question.
and then and then the third one is application. So the first one is I notice. The second one would be I wonder, and then the third one would be I apply. How can I apply this in my life?
It's the so what. The third one about
Yeah.
application is so what. What does this mean for our daily lives? And so we want to recommend that you start first by doing that Bible study right now. And the passage that we used for the sermon last Sunday was 1 Peter 1 verse 3 to 7. So just take a moment now, maybe assign a few readers to read it, or maybe everyone take one verse each. If you have a bigger group, then those verses, then just say a hearty amen, and then take a moment to reflect on that, and then just share those three things. Something that you notice, something that you're curious about, or a question that you have, something that we can apply the so what to this text for our lives. Enjoy. We'll see you in a bit.
Hey, welcome back. I hope you guys had a good time just sharing your insights about what you observed, what you are curious about, and what you can apply. We've got a few more questions for you guys. And in this particular section, we want to ask about this whole idea about the living hope. So, Abel, why don't you tell us, as you were writing the sermon, as you were thinking about this whole idea of living hope, why don't you flesh it out for us a little bit?
Yeah. So firstly, the title of the sermon is Hope in Hardship. I think the central idea is in this one line, that we can endure hardship, we can have hope to endure hardship because Christ suffered hardship to be our hope. And that's the idea, that's the post-resurrection hope that we have. What does it mean to be Easter people living in a Good Friday world? It means that we can have a living hope, an eternal hope, and a genuine hope. And these three kinds of hopes are captured within the text in the opening letter that St. Peter has to the letter in the letter to the church all across Asia. And he basically says, firstly, he starts with a blessing. Praise be to God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And what does he say next? In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope. And that's the first point, that we've been given new birth into a living hope. And we sing about these words a lot, actually.
Yeah.
We have a song that we always sing here at Htbb. It's called Living Hope.
Yeah.
But what does it mean to have a living hope? And I think that the opposite of a living hope is a dead end. It's a sense that, I cannot go anywhere. This is it. This is my lot in life. Mine now is more than anything else. I'm defined by my circumstances. But a living hope is this sense that what is coming is greater than what you have right now. And living hope is living because our hope is hinged not on our circumstances, not even by our own effort. That is why it's said that we are born into it. No one has ever bragged about being born because it's not an effort that you can make. It's a gift that you can receive. We're born into this hope, and it's a living hope because our hope is rooted in the resurrection of Christ.
Yeah.
And because Christ is alive, so is our hope. But if Christ remained dead, so would our hope have been.
Yeah, and I read recently that the opposite of hope is despair, and the opposite of faith is cynicism. And I think that seems to be like the context that Peter was writing to as well. The people that he was writing to his audience, they were really struggling with a lot of hopelessness around them. And so this was really key at that time to know that they were not facing a dead end, but there is hope. And so I was just thinking, is there anything in my life that I had hoped for? I think all of us have many different hopes, and one particular hope that I thought of might seem a little silly, but when I was younger in my teenage years, I knew those were like the years that I was going to get really tall, but I never did. And that was a hope that I always wanted to have. I actually would jump a lot and get involved in netball and basketball, but unfortunately
genetics weren't on your side.
Nope. The Lumbang people are not known.
They have a lower center of gravity.
Yeah, not known
it's
for
better for the mountains.
But that's one hope. How about you, Abel?
I think hope is just so innate to us, right? So growing up, we had all sorts of hope. I remember one of my first few hopes was to go overseas, and I never got to travel actually outside of Malaysia until much later in life. But closer to home, when we both got married, and after a few years of being married, we started to hope for a child. And I think some people within the church relate with this, or maybe not. But for us, it was a really sort of real thing to have an unfulfilled hope for quite a while. We were trying to have a child, never got successful for a while. I actually began to see doctors. That was not helpful as well for the first few stages, but people were praying for us. And then one day, that hope was fulfilled, and we have a super active 3-year-old son right now. And so for us, for me, when I think about living hope in the closest possible way, it's my son. He's a living hope that has been born, but that did not come for a while. It involved waiting, and it's something to steward as well, because we often think of hope as something that comes and then it's gone once it's fulfilled. But a living hope continues on. There's a sense of permanence as well. There's a sense to steward that hope too.
Yeah. And so we wanted to ask you this question. What is one thing in your life, maybe in the past, if you're comfortable sharing, that you had hoped for, or something that you're still hoping for? We shared that story earlier on, but there might be some people in your group who you are still waiting for something. There's still a hope unfulfilled. And within the context of your group, if you would like to share that and receive prayer, we'd love for you to be able to do that. So go ahead and share anything in your life that you had once hoped for or that you still hope for. Enjoy. Hey, welcome back. So we hope you had a good discussion. For this next section, we want to talk about this whole idea of an eternal hope. Abel, why don't you tell us what you were meaning when you were sort of just talking about eternal hope?
Yeah, so Peter continues to write in 1 Peter 1, right? He talks about this living hope that we're born into through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. And this inheritance is kept in heaven for you. And it's this picture that our hope is living, and our hope is also eternal. And our hope is a long hope. It's not just a short, flash in the pan, but it's a long one. And that gives us perspective. So I think about how, whenever we go through a tough time, if you can just for a moment now reflect on a recent challenge that you've had. Maybe it's an unfulfilled desire, maybe it's a trial, maybe it's a silent suffering that you're going through, maybe it's a conflict, maybe it's just something that is a thorn in the flesh, something really difficult, something that you're finding hardship in. What gives us hope is a sense of perspective that this too will pass. If it's temporary, if it can spoil, if it can fade, if it can perish, it will probably pass, and that means that there's something next. And I think the definition of hopelessness is to think this hardship is all I have forever right now. But the definition of hope, or the sense of hope, is that this hardship that I'm facing is temporary. This too will pass. There's something coming, and there's actually something more permanent and more long lasting that I can look forward to. And that's why hope by its nature is future oriented. And that's why I think, this second aspect of hope that Peter is talking about is that it's eternal. It gives us an eternal perspective, so that whatever we're going through in this world right now that is difficult is not going to be hopelessness, because as difficult as it is, there's going to be a good future, and we can cling on to that. It gives us a sense of centeredness and perspective. And within this point, I also talk about Admiral James Stockdale, who was trapped for 7 years, suffering, And people were in that environment of waiting, what's next, when can we get out of this difficult situation? And what he says is quite incredible. He says you must never lose hope, but also don't stop facing the reality, the harsh reality of what you're facing. And so it's this sort of, tension between faith and hope, but also being able to face reality and recognize that it is difficult. Let's be honest, it is tough, but this is not going to define me because this is only temporary. And the opposite of a temporary pain is an eternal hope.
Very good. And am I right to say that this whole idea in living hope is that for the present and now, I have something that is alive, but also this idea of eternal hope is that for the future, I know where I'm headed to. It's sort of the perspective, having that sort of eternal perspective.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And actually the context of this letter is Peter is writing to persecuted Christians who are seen as an annoyance to the world. And he's basically saying, do you feel like a pilgrim? Do you feel like an alien? Actually, he addresses them in verse 1, I think it's either verse 1 or verse 2, as to the exiles. He's basically addressing them as, you guys are already aliens, you're already immigrants. And if you feel like you don't belong, that's because you really don't. There is a real home, a true home that you belong to. It's in eternity. And we are all pilgrim people making our way there. And that longing that we have for something true, a home, is an eternal hope that we have. So whatever you're facing right now is momentary, and there's going to be a true reality that you will have, and it's going to be much better. And that points to that eternal hope.
I love this line in verse 4 that says, this inheritance is kept in heaven for you. And it's just like this beautiful idea that God is keeping something for us for when we reunite with Him in heaven, when we see Him in heaven. And it's this whole idea that that's our home, that's our eternal home.
Yes.
That we know our direction and destination, and that's, if we ever feel a sense of, I don't quite belong here, we know why that is. I'm also reminded of this quote by C.S. Lewis, and he said, the Christians that made the most impact in the world, especially the ones in the early ages, were those who had their minds fixed on heaven. And I find that such a cool idea, that as long as we fix our minds on heaven, I think that really changes our perspective. And so we just wanted to open this question up to you. How can we apply this hope in our lives, and how does this change our perspective? How does having an eternal perspective, an eternal hope, change your perspective for what you're going through today? So go ahead and discuss that in your groups, and we'll come back for a final question. Welcome back. This is our final section. We really want to end with prayer for you, for one another. But in this final section, we just want to talk about this idea of a genuine hope. So Abel, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this idea?
So basically, all throughout this letter, and this is just the start of his letter, Peter is saying that you can expect two things in life. The first is you can expect tough times. He's not being a pessimist here. He's actually being honest and truthful, and by doing so, he's being loving. He's saying, he's actually being pastoral. He's saying, you're not even to expect coming suffering. He's addressing people who are already suffering right now. So he says the first thing is expect some suffering. You're going to be going through times that are really difficult. But secondly, even with the suffering that you have, you can have an unshakable perspective of hope, which is why in verse 6, he says, in all this, you greatly rejoice, though for now, for a little while, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. So he recognizes the trials, but he's also saying there is a perspective that you can have. And that gives you genuine hope. In fact, the way he frames suffering is that suffering is like a fire that can refine your faith. It even proves the genuineness of your faith. And, I think back about the times when personally I went through some hardship, and all of us can think back to moments in our life when we had some form of suffering, a trial that seemed difficult, maybe a pain that was so deep that you couldn't talk about, maybe something that was just so tricky that it pushed you to the limit. And it's in moments like this that suffering can either make you think there is absolutely no hope, or that you then begin to refine your idea of hope, and you realize that actually there is hope, and there is a real kind of hope, a real genuine hope that I can have, because the suffering is so great that it just burns away any kind of false hopes. It brings you to a place, of being authentic. And I think about, one particular moment in my life when I felt so near to God, but actually I was going through quite a lot of pain in that same season. And there's this sort of paradox of suffering that in times of great pain, actually you feel like God's really near to you, because your faith is being proven to be genuine, because there's something about that moment that drives you to your knees, that makes you more reliant on God. And I love that quote by C.S. Lewis that says that pain is like God's megaphone to the world to rouse a sleeping world, because God is so near to the brokenhearted. So there's a pastoral point here that Peter is saying to the church that I believe is for us as well. If we're going through a tough time, we can have hope in hardship, because God is not just the God who's cheering us on. The story of Easter is that ours is the God who went through the hardship for us. He suffered for us to become our hope.
That's so good. It's so interesting because right before this, Peter was saying that, we've got an eternal perspective, and he's sort of just trying to encourage them. But then he then brings them to earth and says, but you are going to suffer grief and all kinds of trials. And I love how he says in verse 7, your faith is worth more than gold. And I think that's just a really interesting thought to just hold on to. Maybe this evening as you go back, your faith is worth more than gold. Your relationship with God is worth more than anything this world can offer. And if suffering and grief and trials brings you closer to God, then it's in some ways it's worth your
And there's some things that are more valuable than what money can buy.
Yes.
And I think that's what Peter's alluding to, that when you hold on to your faith, to your values, to your faith in Jesus, despite all these trials, blessed are the persecuted, is what he's trying to say to the reader. To know that God is near you, and that you might even be giving up gold for your faith. There is a trade-off here, but it's worth it. The cause is greater than the cost.
Yes. So on that note, why don't you guys just take some time to pray for one another? If you feel led to, you can even share about anything that you're going through that is difficult, any trials or challenges that you're going through. And then let's spend the next moment praying for one another. But for now, we will say goodnight and hope you guys are having a great Connect group. And it's so good that we got to be with you guys via video tonight. Enjoy the rest of the evening and good night.
God bless.